Hello y'all, and welcome back. At the end of the last video I said that in this video we would be getting into Socrates' philosophical method, but I should have said the next module, and we'll do his philosophy in the next module. But in this module we have to take a brief historical excursus to address a very important objection, and the answer to that is going to help us understand why Socrates invents ethics and philosophy, which of course for him is ethics. So Socrates' project, recall, is to make the people of Athens better people morally, and this in turn requires that they themselves come to the realization that they are not already where they need to be, so they're not good people. And at this point you might well raise the following objection. You might say, why is Socrates doing this? I understand why he might want to do it. It sounds really good and noble, make the people around you better. But between what you want to do and what you actually invest time in lies the very important consideration of what is actually possible, like what you're able to do. And we've just been discussing why it is that people need to take their own moral journey. This realization that somebody is not where they need to be morally is one that they have to kind of come to on their own. You can't change someone. My experience, you might say, and I'd say this too, speaking for myself, attempting to change people has come to grief, right? It doesn't work. Why can't Socrates just kind of open his hand, let go, and let people, take their own moral journey? Why is he trying to make them better? This is a really important objection, right? What is Socrates' deal? Is he hopelessly idealistic? Is he foolish, noble but foolish? Well, in order to answer this question, we have to do a bit of history. So Socrates, recall, is a Greek. And ancient Greece has a pretty prominent place in popular imagination, such that a lot of people have what I would consider a fairly impressive knowledge of Greek culture and history. But in the event that you don't, and I had to kind of just share one fact about ancient Greece to help you understand it, it would be this. The ancient Greeks have no king. They are determined to bow the knee to no one person. So they have no king, no emperor. They see this as barbaric and tyrannical. And this fact not only sets them apart from all other ancient civilizations, and for that matter, many or most modern civilizations, but it also shapes, I think, literally every other aspect of their history and culture. Really nothing can properly be understood without a full grasp of this kind of guiding principle of Greek thought, politically. So the Greeks are divided into city-states. So these are, as the name suggests, independent cities, which are totally independent political entities. So independent in the sense that they don't only have separate people in power, but they have, in many cases, radically different forms of government. And they're separated from one another by the rugged and mountainous terrain of Greece, of the land of Greece. So they're really quite distinct, and they have different currency and so forth. So they're united in that they all identify as Greek, they all speak Greek, and they all worship the same Greek gods and goddesses. Zeus, Hera, Athena, Aphrodite, those. But in other respects, they are totally distinct. Now, the most powerful Greek city-states by far are Athens and Sparta. There were hundreds of these city-states, possibly even thousands. Some of them were just, no bigger than villages. But very few that held any material, political, or military power. And the few that did were again totally eclipsed by Athens and Sparta. And Athens and Sparta, while the citizens of both were proud Greeks, could not, I think, have been more different. Athens was wealthy, educated, cosmopolitan. At its height in the middle of the 5th century BC, it boasted the finest schools, temples, theaters, the world's most famous poets, philosophers, architects, sculptors, playwrights. Citizens had a very high standard of living. The Piraeus brought in the equivalent of billions of dollars of revenue globally, or annually rather. And it was also, not insignificantly, the birthplace of modern democracy. It was as close as we're going to find to a pure democracy, at least in the ancient world. And this fact was not lost on its citizens, who were very proud of the right that they had to elect their officials, to determine laws and policies in many cases, and of course to serve on juries. So for people in Athens, all except the very lowest classes, that is, life was very good. Sparta was, well, completely different. I suppose as good a place as any to start is with the women. Women in Sparta had rights which eclipsed that of women, again, anywhere else in the ancient world. Women ran things in Sparta. They controlled hiring and firing, finances, business. It was said that the only person a Spartan man ever called master was his wife. And the reason for this is because in Sparta men were good for one thing and one thing only, and that is, of course, war. At the age of 7, a Spartan boy was taken away from his father and mother and placed in a group of other boys called an agele. These boys were deliberately underfed, so they were forced to steal food to survive. If they were caught, they were beaten, not for stealing, but for getting caught. This was to encourage cunning and resourcefulness. They were trained daily not only in reading, writing, singing, and performance, but in running, wrestling, and hand-to-hand combat. At the age of 12, everything else was taken away from them besides a sword and a single cloak, which was their only garment in all weather for the entire year. If they wanted to sleep on something besides the bare ground, they had to pull reeds from the river by hand to form a mattress. As a result of this hard and brutal training, by the time they reached adulthood, they were fiercely devoted to one another, the other men in their agele, and were, by some distance, the finest warriors on earth. Despite being a fraction of the size of Athens, Sparta was instrumental in repelling the Persian invasion during the Greco-Persian Wars of the early 5th century, and as a result of its role there, became much more powerful than it had been before. And it was only a matter of time before the two most powerful city-states, Athens and Sparta, clashed, and in 431, war broke out. The war between Athens and Sparta is referred to by historians as the Peloponnesian War or wars. Really, it is a couple wars, a series of wars, really two wars, separated by a tenuous peace. And it's not exactly a war between Athens and Sparta because both Athens and Sparta recruited other city-states onto their side, and sometimes extra-Greek entities, political entities. So Athens was the head of what was known as the Delian League, and the Spartans headed the Peloponnesian League, which included other city-states like Corinth and Thebes. The causes and history of the war are enormously complex, not least because it lasted until 404, a full 27 years, and spanned several different leadership structures on both sides. The story of the war is enormously fascinating and can be found in the book The Peloponnesian War, written by the Greek historian Thucydides. But to give you a sense of how well-trained the Spartan army was, we need to compare some numbers. Now, we can't quite compare army size for a couple of reasons. First, Athens didn't have a standing army. This, like having a king, was considered something that a tyrant would do. Sparta was different, obviously, because they sort of were all members of the military in a way. But here the numbers are also hard to determine because Spartans recruited many non-Spartans into their military, not least many so-called helotes, residents or denizens of the area in and around Sparta, whose social and political relationship to Spartans proper is unclear. But, while we don't know the size of the armies just as such, we do know the size of the city-states. So Thucydides tells us that Sparta is no larger than 50,000 people, and that Athens is no smaller than 300,000. So Athens is at the very least about 6 times as large as Sparta. And despite those overwhelming odds, Sparta wins the Peloponnesian Wars. Now, the point is going to be tied very closely to what happens when Sparta wins these wars. And what happens and how that ties into Socrates we'll look at in the next video. Thanks.